Welcome to Tramlines, a podcast from Agrii. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. In this episode, I'm talking to Beth Metson, who is Agrii's Farm Environmental Advisor. Today, we'll be looking at the 25-year Environment Plan and how that policy links with the Sustainable Farming Incentive. Crucially, though, we'll be asking why this approach is different and what sustainable farming could really mean for farmers. So, hello, Beth.
Hi, Tony.
Hello, and welcome to Tramlines. There's so much to talk about here, but can we start with the key question? So, there's a lot of change here with regards to environmental policy. What are our aims here as the farming industry?
Okay, so yeah, we are, like you're right in saying that, we are in a change, we're in a transition in farming at the moment. We've got lots of different policies coming at us from different angles, and I think in the industry it's really hard to fathom which direction to go in. But essentially, what I try to aim for is this 25-year environment plan, because I think that sets it out very nicely. It's got a long list of things that we're trying to achieve, and not only are we trying to achieve profitability on the farm now, but we're also, we've got all these different aims and objectives with water, biodiversity, soil, climate change, and that's detailed in the environment plan, and we've got a huge part to play in that in agriculture.
Yeah, so there's a lot there that you're talking about. We've got the financial side, which obviously is really important and on the mind of farmers, but also, soil and water. So from your point of view as a specialist, where do we start?
So essentially, profitability is key. Essentially, we want sustainable businesses. So profitability is the number one, as always. In terms of the other areas, I think we've got to be careful not to isolate the bits and pieces. And actually, the true value in these things is actually bringing them all together and not just focusing on one thing. So one of the dangers at the moment is everyone's sort of a bit focused on carbon. And actually, yeah, that's great. And carbon smart farming will give a huge amount of other benefits. And it's that stacking benefits, which I think is really important, which is why I quite like the 25-year environment plan, because it's all about stacking benefits and making sure that our actions deliver more than just one objective. And that's where the value comes.
So that stacking is really important when it translates through to the financial benefit, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's at the end of the day, we haven't got profitability and a sustainable business in terms of the financials. We don't have a business. So that's got to be key. But we've got to achieve that profitability sustainably.
Right. So when you go onto a farm and you're advising a farmer, where do you start in terms of talking to that farmer about their particular farm and soil erosion, managing soils, water, flood prevention, etc.? Where do you start with your advice?
Okay, well, the key, it's all different. There's essentially lots of different directions you're going to be coming from and towards. So the first thing you really must do is obviously understand the farmers and the land managers' objectives. Their understanding and knowledge and experience of the farm itself. I think that's really important, because you get a really good understanding of the challenges, and they might not understand it in the same way that you do, and they might not be experiencing in the same way that you might want that to change, but that will give you a really good insight. So giving that farmer the chance, or the land manager the chance to portray that to you is key. And then from there, it would be making sure that you're looking at the wider landscape. So you're essentially not just looking at the farm scale, but making sure you're looking wider afield and thinking about what's going on around that farm, like what habitats are there, what do we need to join up in terms of biodiversity, what are the challenges when it comes to cropping, or could we be doing something different, can we access some funding from the government or somewhere else that we could change things slightly for the better. And we could, and actually one of the key things that I always focus on is education, and making sure that what I'm advising and helping that farmer with, that they understand. And I think knowledge is power at the end of the day, because if they understand my objectives and what I'm trying to aim for, they can be engaged with that too. And it's not just me giving them a to-do list. I kind of get where we're going with this, and yes, I'm up for that, or I'm not. And actually, can we slow down a bit? And I'm quite keen on this, but I need a bit more coaxing. So we can understand the pace, we can understand what direction to go in, and where the big impacts are going to be to start with.
Sure, but your to-do list starts with the farmer's objectives, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what sort of objectives, I'm really interested to farmers share with you? What are their aims when you have that first that first conversation?
Yeah, I mean, and actually, quite often they're not put as aims and objectives. They're usually put as issues and problems.
Okay.
So it could be that we're getting, we've got this wet corner in over here that's not very profitable. The yield map shows it's dreadful, and actually, yes, that's bad for profitability, but also it's really bad for the environment as well. And actually, we can improve your profitability, but we can also add some real value when it comes to the environment. We can clean up perhaps the local water environment. Perhaps there's a problem with soil erosion there. There could be a drainage issue, and we can look in that. So it's usually to do with things like workability of the soil. It could be to do with, they might even have an issue with regulators. There's often one called in, and then they then got an issue with compliance. And actually, that's what I tend to do. Is I don't want to just tick a box. I don't want to just make sure that the compliance person is happy. Well, let's bring that back a bit and think what's the compliance and regulation telling us. Right, well, how can we make that work to build a more resilient and sustainable farm? Actually, we don't want to just say, oh, let's just do that record keeping and we'll just tick that box. Let's think, right, well, they want us to do that and achieve that. How can we make that work for us?
And so is the challenge here that farmers could look at their farms from a different environmental perspective?
And that's half of the battle, is actually kind of change, not necessarily thinking that this regulation is bad for the farm. Actually, it could be good for the farm, and we need to almost like change it around and look at it from a different angle. And also, most of those issues and problems are very holistic to actually increasing wildlife and biodiversity on the farm anyway. So we are looking for those unproductive areas, and actually perhaps the answer isn't to grow a crop on there, and it is to build a habitat and then join that up with other habitats, linear features around the farm, and make those areas give us a feel-good feeling, rather than looking at it and being quite depressed about that little area in the field.
But you've talked about some specifics that farmers may come up with when you go to have that first consultation with them. Can you share any of those great wins that you've maybe started to see on farms with some of your clients?
Yeah, so I mean, the obvious thing to speak about here is stewardship and countryside stewardship, and the huge uplift in people taking up stewardship and getting some good value out of it, not just profitability but environmental. And I think the danger with stewardship is to just focus on the problem areas and not think of the farm as something you can build biodiversity, tackle water pollution and soil health. And the successes I've had have been the ones that have really wanted to engage in all those things and actually really utilize stewardship in particular to benefit the farm itself. So rather than thinking about that's my stewardship area and this is my cropping area, really put the whole thing together, which is really where the challenge is essentially. It's relatively straightforward to say, that's my stewardship bit, this is my cropping bit. And I'm not necessarily saying footprint wise they need to interlink, but there needs to be a reason why you've put that particular thing there that's going to benefit the farm itself.
Yeah.
So my successes would be those that truly engage with the full process rather than just doing the minimum.
And to ask the bigger question, with lots of farmers participating in this new, not necessarily a new way of farming, but a slightly different focus compared to what farmers have been asked to do over the last, 30 or so years. Do you think we might see a difference in our countryside in the regularity of flooding, for example? Do you think we might actually see a difference?
I do. I think the change in funding is going to shift that, but there needs to be better funding, and actually the true value of these services that farming can provide need to be truly valued for us to be able to see that. So we're in the hands a little bit of policymakers, unfortunately, and I think that change is happening, and I hope it does, because at the moment we're not there. We're nowhere near there actually. in terms of the value that's being put on some of these, I want to say ecosystem services, and that is what it is. But I know it's a bit of a buzzword, but that needs to be truly valued for us to be able to see that, because farmers are very much part of that big solution, and without managing land differently and more attention to detail, we won't achieve the 25-year environment plan. You know, farmers are they're pinnacle in that. We need them to engage in that for those changes to happen. And importantly, we need collaboration as well. So I think not only will we see you know, the land-based stuff change, I think we'll see more landscape approaches and more collaboration within the industry, which will be great. Sharing knowledge, you know, the industry are getting amazing at sharing knowledge, and I think that's only going to get more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. And just coming back to your point there, we absolutely need a really economically vibrant farming community, don't we, for this to happen? Just because I think it's a term I hadn't heard until that recently, which is right behind this 25-year environment plan, is public money for public goods. Can you just help us there? What does that really mean? Because it is a change, isn't it?
We're being paid as service providers, I think, is the way to think of it. So the service we are providing comes from our ecosystems that we are managing. So our ecosystems could be, you know, the water environment. So we will be providing cleaner water if we manage our land differently, whether that be reducing our nitrogen reliance, whether that be, you know, using pest predator approaches rather than chemistry. You know, perhaps it's even making sure our, you know, soil profile is in a better state so that we don't lose a lot of sediment through our land drains. So there's, you know, clean water would be an obvious public good, because that services the public. The public want cleaner water. You know, we will be benefiting our water companies because they will be having to clean up our water less. So that's a public good. Other things that we would be providing would be more wildlife. So we obviously get a huge benefit as the public out of wildlife and seeing biodiversity, green space, you know, mentally beneficial. Things like climate change, you know, is another one. You know, yes, and that is hugely related to carbon, but it's bigger than that. So climate change adaptation in terms of flood resilience, and, you know, making sure the land's managed in an appropriate way and where it is location wise. So there's all these, I mean, and that's just like the tip of the ocean in terms of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the amount of public goods that we can provide as land managers is quite huge, really. And not even mentioning pollinators, you know, that's a huge public good in terms of food production.
Yeah. It just strikes me just how much a farmer has to think about and consider. So to help us sort of, if you like, simplify that, when you are advising your farmers, how do you chunk that down into sort of, if you like, a plan that is easy to focus on, or is that the right route?
I think, yeah, definitely a plan. I mean, I would tend to utilize the funding. My focuses tend to be on the funding that's available, because that's a good way to start, because we can not, I don't want to say bend things to make sure that they can benefit the farm, but they can, on paper, they sometimes don't look like they will necessarily benefit the farm, but actually the funding is there for a reason, and it's there because there's an environmental value if you were to take up some of this funding. And it can work for a lot of these options. So I suppose I've got my key options I know will stack up benefits on farm. So I know that if we, you know, it's simply, if we buffer every watercourse, there will be a benefit to that. And not only will it be benefiting our water environment, it will also be sequestering carbon. And if we put flowers in that margin, it will be doing something for our pollinators. And if we happen to put our bean crop next to that flower margin, then it, you know, pollinators will be really important for that. So I make sure I look at a farm from a holistic perspective, not just the farm scale, but landscape scale. And I make sure that I am dealing with some of the problems that the farmer has already discussed with me, and how can I fund some of that environmentally to fix those problems, but also stack up the benefits of all the other things that the 25-year environment plans say. But also, build an area that land manager is kind of, you know, I don't want to be too evangelistic, but proud of in terms of biodiversity, and to walk around it and have that feel good feeling.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, that, I guess, is the dream, isn't it? Is to and farmers are always, from in my experience growing up in farming, terrifically proud of crops and in terms of being custodians of the land. I mean, it probably is an incredibly unique industry from that perspective. Fantastic industry to be in. So it sounds like we all need a bit of advice. There's so much to get our head around with all these changes and the speed of changes. So I guess yourself and agronomists are key to that.
Yeah, and I think you're right in the way you said that as well. Me working alongside an agronomist, in a three-way partnership essentially with the land manager, is always a successful relationship. That's always how we try and do that, because we're all coming from slightly different angles, and the idea is to get to the point where we're compromising enough that we've got a good plan ahead of us. So yeah, sitting as a three, that is the key to a success.
So talking about plans and planning for the next steps and the future, at what stage are we at in terms of understanding the legislation, the rules, and what that's going to mean in terms of support?
Okay, so as you've spoken about, we're in an element of transition. How we're going to be paid for this will be under environmental land management, and that is very much evolving. So we're still waiting for the key detail about how what we're going to be asked to do in terms of public goods, public money for public goods. And that's really challenging, because we don't actually know what we're going to have to do for any money at the moment when it comes to that. So trying to plan for that is really difficult, and particularly we don't know what the outcomes that we are being asked to do. We don't know what they are. Really importantly, we don't know how that's going to be monitored either. So again, in terms of business decisions, we're at a point when we're in quite uncertain times.
So listening to what you're saying, Beth, it's a really difficult time, a difficult moment, isn't it, for not only farmers and growers, but also the industry as a whole to keep track of these changes.
Absolutely, yeah. We're all trying to keep our ear to the ground and trying to get on lots of different, lots of different boards, lots of different calls, making sure that we hit. Because sometimes at this point, I find we might not know the detail, but knowing the direction of travel is as interesting at the moment, to know what we can be doing now to prepare for the future, to add resilience into the system.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
So what would be your sort of call to action for growers, or actually anyone listening to this podcast today, in terms of thinking about stepping into this period of change and adopting these environmental plans? What would be your key notes for us all to take away?
I think as we've discussed, it's a big subject, and there's a huge amount to consider. So I think the first thing I would be saying to people is see this as an opportunity rather than a negative. It's a real opportunity to have an impact on a global a global problem, which not many people can say, and I think that's a real benefit and an opportunity. But also it's an opportunity to make your business and the environment you're living in more sustainable. So I would be engaging in the new transition. At the moment, if we're talking about tomorrow, what would I do? If you're not already, I'd be engaging in stewardship schemes. I would be making sure that I'm picking the right options that will benefit not just one thing at a time. I would be making sure I'm stacking those benefits. And I would be, I think anything that you'd be worried about in terms of, whether it be conservation agriculture or agroecology and that sort of thing, I would just educate, listen to podcasts and read blogs about these things, because there's a lot of information out there and there's a lot of sharing going on as well. And I think, knowledge, like I said, knowledge is key to this.
Thank you, Beth, for sharing your thoughts today on how we look at these changes. In the way we're being asked to farm, balancing the financial interest of profitability with environmental sustainability. A time that perhaps needs a different approach that could lead to a real win-win. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer-term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. If you have any questions that you'd like us to ask the experts, email info@agrii.co.uk. See you next time.